and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Now, back in March, Malaysia collaborated with the WHO in a solidarity trial to test several drugs globally in treating COVID-19 patients. However, since then, despite proactive signaling that we are keen to participate in clinical trials of a COVID-19 vaccine, late-stage clinical trials are being conducted elsewhere and not in Malaysia. Tonight on the show, we want to discuss how Malaysia maybe might need to reposition itself in the area of drug research and development. Dr Akhmal Yusof is the CEO of Clinical Research Malaysia, and he joins us on the show tonight. Welcome, Dr. Akhmal. It's good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Maybe you can begin by telling us a little bit about what CRM, or Clinical Research Malaysia, does. What exactly was it set up to achieve?
Well, Clinical Research Malaysia was set up to improve in terms of the way how we manage clinical research in Malaysia, especially sponsored research that comes from multinational company and contract research organization. It was formed back in 2012. Now we have, glad to say that there are more than 1,400 clinical trials that we have conducted. At present, we are conducting around 800 clinical trials across 170 centers in Malaysia, involving more than 800 clinicians. And of course, you just imagine how many support staff we are talking about. In Clinical Research Malaysia, we have around 130 personnel that look into clinical research as a study coordinators.
Okay, so as I understand, CRM's work is both to market Malaysia as a destination for clinical trials and also to provide support services when those trials do come to the country. So perhaps help us understand, what do you say, how does the country market itself globally when it comes to things like clinical trials?
Well, it's a good question. Actually, when we first started, we are grappling what are the fine things that we can sell in terms of the value proposition. I'm glad to say that the paramount value proposition is towards ourselves in terms of the properties of being multi-racial populations. We have a diverse genomics for that matter, and a third of world population genomics practically live in Malaysia. Secondly, we have fantastic clinicians, researchers with a good track record. I say good, it's actually an underestimate, because we have delivered excellent results that produce speed, reliability and quality in delivering of clinical trials. But most of all, we are being supported by the government itself in terms of clinical research. Ministry of Health has a fantastic infrastructure and improving every year on year to welcome clinical research to Malaysia.
Is CRM affiliated to the government? It's set up by the government?
It is set up by the government. We are affiliated or actually owned by the Ministry of Health.
All right. So what I'm trying to understand is, why is it that Malaysia wants to position itself to attract clinical trials? Why is that a good thing? Why do we want clinical trials in our country?
I believe it's all about how we can create more jobs in terms of the scientists, the clinicians. Maybe clinician is not a good example, but science graduate for a matter. They will be able to actually start from somewhere by being a study coordinator.
Job creation in the sciences.
Exactly. Number two is about bringing in gross national income. Each clinical research project comes with sponsors, what they call budget and finance. Number three, I think it is also important to bring in the clinical trials so that we can have other intangible benefit. The intangible benefit that I'm leading to is, one, getting our doctors involved in multiple new science and getting their experience and technology with new development for that matter. Being able to write their own methodology when conducting clinical research by being part of the clinical research team. And also about being able to introduce new medicine which is available but not registered yet in the world. These are medicines that would be able to help patients who have exhausted their standard therapy, oncology for that matter. One failed the standard therapy, the other way to go is clinical trials.
It's very interesting. It's nice to know that we're a great guinea pig nation. And I think in this actually guinea pig is not a bad word. I do want to ask you though, when we talk about investments in the country, we often talk about different grades of investments, right? And I understand that there is some discussion about the types of investments we're getting. We're not getting the top of the line. We're not getting the first phase, first in human types of trials. Those are the kind of not the privilege, but the ones that people seek to get as more important than the kind of last phase trials that we are getting. Is that true? Is that criticism correct?
Spot on. But before I answer that, I'd like to revert back about what you said earlier about nation of guinea pigs. I think it's not correct on that basis. I like people to look at clinical trials as another source of treatment. It should be part of the management of patients. If you go to international centers in the whole wide world, in the Western world or in the Eastern world, if you are lack of treatment, the next things, or you have exhausted the treatment, the next thing is clinical trial. It should be treated as part of the treatment of the patients. Now, back to your questions about the investment in early phase of clinical research. Yes, I agree with you that there are very limited number that we receive, but that doesn't mean we are trying to build up that infrastructure. We have now a phase 1 first in human center that is dedicated to receive all these international or even local studies.
Hang on. Dr. Akhmal, maybe before you get into that, perhaps for the layperson like myself who may not understand the ins and outs of a clinical trial, can you please break it down for us what a clinical trial entails when you talk about the first phase or the late stage? What are the different stages and phases, and why are they, some are more desirable than others?
In short, there are 3 stages of clinical trials. The first phase is about getting the medicine from animal studies to human. And this is what we call as first in human. And in the first phase of clinical research, we are looking at whether the dose is right from being from the animal studies to human, whether it is safe, whether it doesn't cause any much problem in terms of human for that matter. Then we move on to the second stage where it is looking at how it's supposed to do in terms of hypothesis. If it's hypertension, does it really do the work that it's supposed to do? But most of all, it's also looking at safety. And the number of patients in phase 1 is probably maybe less than 100, but in the phase 2, it probably more, maybe around 200 to 300 patients. But when it goes to the bigger scale, in phase 3, it involves maybe 1,000, 3,000, depending on the hypothesis that we are trying to prove. These type of studies are looking at not only safety, but also efficacy. And efficacy can be so many types of objective for that matter, whether it's a progression-free, whether it's survival, and that determines how long the study can be.
Okay. So very quickly, why is the first phase, first in human trials, preferable or much sought after, whereas the late stage trials that we seem to get a lot of, less preferable in terms of the kind of matrix that you set out in the first instance?
In what you call economic scale, it's like a waterfall effect. If you have the experience of doing the first in human, you get more phase 2, you get more phase 3 studies.
Okay, understood.
And that will trickles down and open up the whole conundrum for other types of compound or similar classes, different compound to be conducted in the country.
Okay.
That's why we move on into building up the first in human and first phase center.
All right, Dr. Akhmal, we're going to come back. We're going to take a quick break, come back and continue this conversation on Consider This. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. if you've just joined us, you're watching Consider This with me, Melisa Idris and Sharaad Kuttan. We're chatting to Dr Akhmal Yusof. He's the CEO of Clinical Research Malaysia. Now, Dr. Akhmal, just before the break, you mentioned that we have a clinical research centre in Sarawak that is the first to be accredited for first phase, first in human trials, right? Research. So, tell me about the success of this centre, because while we are accredited, have we been successful in attracting the kind of preferable first in human research that you talked about earlier?
Before I answer your question, phase 1 can be conducted in any hospital.
Okay.
That is phase 1B. But when we talk about first in human, you must be in a place where it is dedicatedly prepared to do so, because the risk of managing this type of study from what we call as animal to first in human is quite high in terms of the mitigations and also about the safety of the patients. So that is why we need to be able to produce a center that is well equipped with regards to the life saving and also the emergency management. Now, this depends a lot of experience, and we are not saying that we are lacking experience in terms of the doctor managing these centers, but a lack of experience in terms of conducting this type of trials. And usually sponsors, international organizations would like to go to centers that has more experience. Even having said that, centers with a high experience do have their issues as well. I think you can read in the web in terms of the development in the past. For this type of centers, they carry a lot of risk.
Okay. I do want to ask you if there's another problem, and it's been pointed out to me by observers of the industry, is that the issue of legislation. That says that Malaysia's guidelines for research are too stringent, and as a consequence, we've fallen behind Singapore, we've fallen behind Thailand in terms of attracting clinical trials. We don't allow for stem cell research, I understand. We don't. There are a lot of areas where the legislation precludes, Malaysia from being an attractive destination. Would you agree with that criticism?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that, yes, we need to be in a same level playing field with other nations in the country, in the region. But having said that, from where we are in 2012 till now, we have opened up so much. We have not got a first in human center, now we do, and it's accredited by the same regulatory bodies. We do not have stem cells clinical trials in the past. Now we are open up to be able to accept companies with stem cell. There is guidelines now formed in order to manage that. Having said that, there are more can be done. And this is where the no parts comes into the picture.
But why is it the way of stringent? I mean, is the criticism that legislation is too stringent correct? And if it's so, what was the reason, the thinking behind creating guidelines that were so strict?
I think it goes back to the safety of and protection of the mankind in Malaysia. We in Malaysia are very lucky to have these regulatory bodies that putting patient safety first. And it's not only one. In clinical research, we have also the ethics committee as well. And these are the two paramount bodies in Malaysia that actually guide multinational centers, multinational companies to conduct clinical research in Malaysia. And so far, if you look at all the history records, we do not have that kind of problems that we see in other countries. In a way, it is restricting. But on another things, we also need to expand a little bit. There are some regulations that I thought maybe we can be more competitive, or even a level playing field with other nations.
Yeah, maybe you could elaborate. Could you give us details about where is it? Because we're not experts.
Where can we
where
is the wiggle room?
And clearly there are global best practices. I mean, and countries like Singapore obviously want to protect their integrity as well. So why can't we match a Singapore in those terms?
I think it depends on how the authorities opening up again. maybe at the moment they are following a certain rules and regulation that actually to protect the quality of the product that's going to be investigated in clinical research. I respect that. Having said that, they have already opened up their mind in terms of having a case-to-case discussion. I think that is a good way to start. And with that, I see there is some openness in terms of discussion. And this is some things that is changing compared to before.
So when you talk about, openness in discussion, who are your stakeholders apart from the Ministry of Health, the multinational pharmaceuticals, and who are the stakeholders? Are you talking to local universities? Are you talking to academics? Who are the stakeholders in this discussion to perhaps understand a little bit better where the guidelines need to be tweaked?
We speak to the industry, as we said earlier. We speak to the National Pharmaceutical Regulatory Authority, which is the paramount authority in terms of registration products and also clinical research product. We also have the ethics committee to discuss with in terms of how we can make the ethics committee open up to stem cell research, as you said, one of it, or vaccine for that matter. So these are the stakeholders that we go to. And in terms of universities, we look into how we could be able to work together in terms of sharing resources rather than everybody fight on their own. We can use the services that CRM provided in order to expedite clinical research to be conducted in the country. That's actually excite the sponsors to come to the country.
Okay, all right, we're going to take another quick break, but we'll continue this conversation, particularly looking at what the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us about our research capacity. So stay tuned to consider this. Thanks so much for staying with Consider This. We're speaking to Dr Akhmal Yusof, CEO of Clinical Research Malaysia. Sharaad, you had a follow-up question.
Yeah,
to Dr.
absolutely. We spoke to Professor Christopher Lee, who previously was, I think, Deputy Director General of Health, and we talked about the deficit in the Malaysian story with regard to COVID-19 and universities and research on drugs and therapeutics. And he came to the conclusion that we are not investing enough, and we're not attracting talent, developing or attracting talent into this field. Now, you have universities as one of your stakeholders. From your point of view, is that correct? Are universities not doing the right kind of research? Are their research priorities off the mark? Has this pandemic exposed that? Are we too much work going into Tongkat Ali and don't know what else, and not enough into some fundamental research of consequence?
Perhaps I can see that we do have talents. If you look at 20 years ago, the person that developed or discovered Nipah virus is from our local universities. And that shows that we do have talent. If we lost that talent, there are, of course, people who are trained to be that kind of talent. What is probably lacking, I believe, is probably the collaboration between all these universities and also agencies in the government, inter-ministerial and so on. For instance, if everyone wants to have a phase 1 center, it costs a lot, and we don't even have that project yet. So all we need is about use each other capacities, think outside of the box, not thinking as a silo, and collaborate in terms of what do we know best about all these new discovery. Sometimes there are failures, and we do not have to reinvent the wheel again.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing with us about the Nipah virus. I didn't know that. That was something new that I learned today. I'm just wondering then, with the COVID-19 pandemic, what has this ecosystem and all of its expertise and all of the investment into its expertise, what has it contributed to the public health response to this pandemic?
I think the most important thing is to understand what are the strains that is going on in Malaysia. That's how we figure out recently that there is a new mutation for that matter. And we know that with that mutation, there is an increase in terms of the infectivity. And this mutation, although was first described in Europe, but it is available around neighboring countries. That is why I believe we are tightening up the border to restrict the movement of people around the border. But having said that, the ministry have done a fantastic job with regards to the control of the disease itself. And as a result, we see that although it is worse in some other countries, but it is manageable in this country.
Okay, I think, I think nobody would dispute the success we've had in managing the pandemic. But the global conversation now around the strains it's put on health systems, on primary health care, we're now talking about research, also the question of public health management and policy. All these have come under a kind of a harsh light. Everybody's looking and saying, is our system holding up? And there are a lot of good things that we've seen about our own system, right? But there are also problems. And the question is, when it comes to your field in clinical research, where do you see the problems? Where do you see the deficits? You talk about collaboration, very interesting, because it doesn't have to be a nationalist approach to this. Science is, of course, global and international. Tell us, where are the real deficits? Who's responsible, and how do we change it? Is it all government's fault? Is it the private sector that should be coming in? Should we have better relationships with pharmaceuticals? How?
You probably need a longer session now.
We do. That's a very big question.
But it's important, firstly, it's about leadership. It's about, vision. What do we want to achieve? And getting the right people for the right job. In terms, it sounds like textbook materials, but this is what drives in terms of the strategies. And with that strategies, it comes with a lot of resources. And that resources must be sustainable, meaning we can't give like 1 or 2 years and that's it. And of course, this is research and development. There are rates of failure. Failure must not be seen as diminishing the effect of innovation. Failure must be seen as a way how we learn how to become better. And this publication that we do, whether it's failing or whether it's a success, it helps not only us, but the world in terms of managing the disease like COVID.
Okay, so in this mantra of the build back better mantra, how would you build back better clinical research?
I believe clinical research must be seen as not only research to develop a product. It must be seen as a way of life in terms of part of treatment, part of the way how we managing our education system, so that from the beginning people understand that research is part of the academic or education program. But most of all, when we look at COVID-19, what is lacking probably, if we could have the wish list is National Vaccine Center for that matter. I think this is something that can help us not only generate jobs for our scientists, but also create interest among our young people to learn science. And when they know there is a job, there is a project, there is a sustainable way to move forward, we can have a career for that matter. But most of all, it comes, as I said earlier, leadership, strategy in terms of training and development, building up the networking with the Western countries, the international universities, to bring that technology back to Malaysia. And this is what's happening in other neighboring countries. And as a result, we may be able to produce, out of many, many failures, our own compound made in Malaysia.
Well, you're absolutely right. We could, continue this conversation for a much longer time. There's so much more to unpack, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have on this episode. We're delighted to have you, and thank you for helping shed some light on this important matter.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right, that's all we have on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, folks, and good night.